Good afternoon, everyone. This is Amanda Avery from the Connect and Communicate Series Planning Committee. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you to Erin from our team for providing closed captioning for this session. Our presentation will be recorded and made available on the College and Research Division blog and sent to those who registered. This session is brought to you by the College and Research Division Board of the Pennsylvania Library Association. I'd like to thank the CRD Board for supporting the Connect and Communicate initiative. If you are not a part of the Pennsylvania Library Association, but live in Pennsylvania, please consider joining PALA for more great programs and initiatives. Our panelists today, Torrie Raish and Emily Rimland, will be speaking about digital badging and micro-certifications and how they can be used to benefit learners, instructors, and librarians. They will provide an overview of their digital badge programs and use cases and best practices of designing and implementing a program that will be useful to anyone considering new modes of meaningful instruction. Torrie Raish is the online learning librarian for Penn State. She's been involved in digital badging initiatives since 2012. She's worked on these initiatives for NASA and for Penn State University. She has her PhD from Penn State University in learning design and technology and is invested in improving the learning experience for all online learners. Emily Rimland is an information literacy librarian and learning technologies coordinator at Penn State. She enjoys providing instruction, reference, and outreach services to undergraduate students and holds an MLIS from the University of Pittsburgh. She's the founder of the ACRL Digital Badge Interest Group and was a Teaching and Learning with Technology Faculty Fellow at Penn State. Emily's recent article about Penn State's badging program can be read online in the January 2nd, 2019 edition of American Libraries Magazine. So during the presentation, feel free to add questions to the chat box. Erin and I will make a list for our panelists. And after the presentation, we'll open up the floor for you all to ask questions. So welcome, Torrie and Emily.
Great, thank you, Amanda, for that introduction. So we're both here in the same room, but we don't really both fit on camera, but we are both here. Just to let you all know, thanks for having us, and we're happy to be here and talking about digital badges with you. So we have some breaking points in the presentation where we'll take questions or have some discussion, but we did have kind of 4 parts to our presentation today. The first part is about overview, background information about digital badges. Then we'll talk a little bit about how and why we tied them to information literacy. Then we have some use cases, basically how we're using the badges here at Penn State. And then we have some kind of best practices, design thoughts that you might want to consider if you're thinking about implementing a digital badge program. So we have it broken up into those 4 parts. Like Amanda said, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat, and then we'll get to them as we have discussion or at the end or something like that. And also feel free to get in touch with us after if you have any follow-up questions. You can get in touch with us by email. We're happy to answer those. So let me share my screen. We have some slides. And is that sharing my main PowerPoint slide? Yes, okay, thank you, Jenny. Just verifying. Okay, so like I said, we have this organized into kind of 4 parts. The first part is some basic overview and background about digital badges. We wanted to kind of start off by situating this in the form of, or thinking about digital badges in the form of a type of academic currency. A lot of times you hear digital badges sort of related in the sense that they're like a new or virtual version of Girl Scout or Boy Scout badges, and that still is true, but we're starting to see them spoken about more in terms of academic currency. There are other things as well beyond badges, but this is one way to think about them as far as situating them within the academic experience that a student would have at a university. And sort of what brought us to this place is the idea that there's a lot of learning that goes unrecognized in this case, higher education, or really could be in any kind of or level of education. that transcripts, which is what students leave with and use as sort of proof of their learning, doesn't really fully capture a lot of the learning that goes on during a typical undergraduate degree or even a graduate degree. How do you recognize that other type of learning, all those different experiences that go into creating a college graduate? And just kind of for reference, we put a actual transcript from a friend that he provided to us to give you some reference. Like, this is what a transcript typically looks like. We took the grade out, although he had very good grades, as I recall.
Yeah, well, it's grad school.
It's grad school. But this is typically all you would see is like an abbreviation of the course, the name of the course, which, as you can see in this example, isn't really at all descriptive, and the number of credits, and then the grade. So there's really not a lot of detail there at all. It doesn't really paint a full picture of what the student may have learned. The other thing that we've started to see is that employers and other people beyond the academy are saying that graduates don't always have the skills they're looking for, that there's a skill gap, and when they come to the workforce, they need to fill in those gaps for new college graduates. So there's also a need to not only display this kind of learning, but kind of fill in those gaps with other types of skills and learning that maybe hasn't happened or at least hasn't been exposed before. So that's kind of what led up to things like digital badges and micro-credentials. Just a little bit of background overview about digital badges specifically. There are two words that we often use interchangeably. Technically, they're different things. Micro-credentials describes like the more umbrella term, of which digital badges is something that's considered a micro-credential. And then digital badges are a specific type of micro-credential. Another thing that could be considered a micro-credential is like a digital certificate that doesn't necessarily have the visual and clickableness of a digital badge. But, you know, if say you did a MOOC or some kind of like online course and you got a like digital certificate as a result of it, that would be a micro-credential, but not necessarily a digital badge. So hopefully that helps kind of clarify. Like I just said, badges have that visual representation like you see in the bottom right corner. This is one of our badges. It's very visual. It kind of gives you an idea of what that badge is about or what skill is involved. And then you can actually click on that and take the person viewing the badge into details about earning the badge. So like who earned it, when, who issued it, those kinds of things. So that is one of the key things that make digital badges what they are, is that ability to click on them and be able to see all that information. We'll talk about this more as we go on. They can also be stacked or combined, so you can, we'll get to this again later with our own badges, but you can combine badges to like showcase your skills around a certain topic, around a certain subject, to really show that you have a certain level of competency. Digital badges are earned on what's called a badging platform, and we'll talk about this more as we go. And they're typically offered at all levels, all disciplines. We're talking about them within the context of primarily undergraduate education at a university, but you see them being used in elementary schools, you see them being used on the workforce, and within all disciplines. We'll get a little bit into this more with our research, like IT is an area that's using them more than maybe some other areas, but you do see across the board different disciplines starting to use them. So just a little bit more about the badge ecosystem and platforms, just so we have kind of a shared understanding of what all of this terminology is. Something really important to badges is called the Open Badge Infrastructure, or OBI. And this is a standard that all badge platforms have to use in order to make the badges translatable between different platforms or different systems. So it's a structured way of having the different fields or the metadata available so that no matter what badging platform you're using, they can be displayed or ported over to or accessed. So that's a really important piece to this. That kind of okay. get some sound going on. Basically right now there's three badging platforms available. Two are by vendors. One is Credly, and they recently bought a platform called Acclaim that some people may have used or been familiar with. Then there's Badgr, and then there could be what we just called homegrown systems. So that's actually what we use at Penn State, is a homegrown system that was developed here locally. And again, that uses that OBI so that, you know, if you wanted to take your badges from Penn State and display them on your LinkedIn profile or take them to another badge platform like Badgr, it would all kind of seamlessly work for you to translate them over to that other system.
Yeah, a couple more homegrown systems are Purdue, started with the homegrown system, and Coastal Carolina.
Right. So those do exist, but those two, Credly and Badgr, have gotten a lot of popularity. Somebody asked, is OBI like the badge version of SCORM? I forget what SCORM is.
It's the compliance for online, for LTI.
Oh,
so
right. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it's like that. It's a standard.
Technical
standard similar to something like that, yeah. Good question. The other thing we wanted to mention here is about LMS and LTI. So LMS stands for Learning Management System. Those are like your Blackboards, Canvas, DTL, those kinds of systems that you're probably using. And LTI is Learning Technology Integration, and that is something that works within the LMS to be able to offer like features of a certain application. So basically, within your learning management system, you may have an LTI integration that allows for badges. I think Badgr definitely has one where you can have the Badgr LTI running within, for example, Canvas, and then be able to offer your badges within a course, within a Canvas course, so that it's all like seamlessly integrated within your LMS, and students don't necessarily have to go off to a separate platform like Credly or Badgr in order to earn the badges. It's all within your LMS. So that's something that's gaining momentum. We're seeing more of, and it's definitely beneficial to have the badge system all within that universe where students are working really actively, like your LMS. The other things that I linked here that are related, but we won't necessarily go into a lot of detail today, but this idea of the Badgr learning platforms. Let me see if I can pull this up. Is that sharing the Safari screen?
No, because it was just your
Yeah, I thought so. Okay, let me try this. Okay. So this is the Badgr pathways. This is relatively new, and what this is it's basically showing you a way to get to a degree or some type of certification. So you can pull in all the different micro-credentials that you might want to use in order to build a map in order to get to an end goal. So in this case, they have an associate degree on the right-hand side, and towards the left, it's kind of showing you the pathway of different credentials a student could pull together in order to earn that associate's degree, in this case, biotechnology. So it's a way to, like I said, kind of map out your learning using different micro-credentials. It's something they recently launched that we think is an interesting development in this area of micro-credentials. So it's giving the learner a lot of like visual information and a pathway to figure out how they can organize themselves in order to get to the end goal, whether it's a degree, a certification, whatever it may be. But we thought that was, like I said, an interesting development. Okay, let me go back to my slides. And the other thing we wanted to mention too, this idea isn't necessarily all that new, but it's been gaining a lot of momentum lately. It's the idea of an experiential transcript or open credentials. And so this idea is one where, again, taking that idea of like the transcript isn't enough, adding some experiences to your transcript as well as the courses and grades that you've gotten along the way. So you can add things like study abroad, undergraduate research, service learning, and then an extension of that, not service learning, but another thing you could add is micro-credentials or badges. So I have an example. I should just share my entire desktop. Let's do that. This is an example from Elon University. They're definitely a university that's been at the forefront of this experiential transcript idea. But this is what you would see as an example on this experiential transcript. You see a student's learning in these different areas we just talked about, like study abroad, internships, etc. But digital badges could, and in some cases are, being added to this type of transcript. The other idea that's mentioned back on the slide is just open credentials. And this is the idea of taking that open standard that was created for badges, or could be in other sectors as well, but applying it to transcripts or other types of credentials. So the idea would be that there's a technical standard for transcripts or credentials that would be used across systems, across universities, and that would create a more open transcript that a student could take if they transfer colleges or went on to graduate school or something like that. That would make it a lot easier to get that information in the students' hands and then for them to kind of port it or use it in other places, because it would standardize it and make all that information open if they wanted to. So that's kind of a larger movement that's happening, but we felt it was related to digital badges, so we wanted to include it. And then lastly, we just have this slide that's talking a little bit more about the idea of open badges and the metadata that's behind them. We like this graphic, we've used it quite a bit. But the idea is what makes digital badges so powerful is all this metadata behind the actual badge. And so some of the things that might be metadata are listed there on the right. The name of the badge, the description, the criteria for earning it, who issued it, the actual evidence that the learner submitted, so you can actually see down to the detail of what that person did in order to earn the badge, as well as things like date it was issued, if that badge aligns with any standards. For example, ACRL framework would be one, and then any other tags that maybe are added to it as descriptors of the work.
Yeah, so with the open badging standard, the evidence is there, but the another feature of using badges is that the learner has a lot of control over their learning and what they share. So it is there, but it's up to the learner to choose to make various levels of evidence or information within that badge visible to other people.
Okay, so we just wanted to pause here and see if there were any questions or anything else we could answer, kind of in the realm of, overview about badges, any questions you have in general about them before we move ahead. Is there anything that's unclear or you'd like to just ask? I don't see anything in the chat, but feel free to either speak up or type it in there if you have any questions. Okay. All right, well, we only got one, I'm good. So we'll move on, but feel free to type any questions you have in there. So on to the next section.
Yeah, so we're going to touch now a little bit on our information literacy program here at Penn State and what made Emily in 2012, 2013 kind of start planning for possible use of digital badges in the library for library instruction. So I know everybody has a little bit of a different landscape in terms of how they engage students with information literacy, whether they have like some kind of required 1-credit class or they integrate with existing courses or it becomes some sort of co-curricular. So here at Penn State, we do not have any required information literacy instruction requirements in terms of general education or getting your degree. However, within general education, it is noted that information literacy is one component of becoming a fluent citizen, whether that's digital fluency or information fluency. So it is included in the general education framework. And so there are some courses that obviously naturally focus on it, and there's other courses that it just makes sense to have information literacy instruction. As we were delivering this instruction, both Emily and I work in the Department of Library Learning Services, so we do a lot of foundational teaching, which is why our primary focus for the badges is foundational learners. But within Penn State as a whole, there's a lot of unbalanced instruction of information literacy. So sometimes, and I'm sure this will sound familiar depending on, regardless of the context, sometimes we'll have a student who says, like, this is my third library beginning session, right? So like they hear basically the same thing again. And then there's other students who will go their entire Penn State career without having any sort of information literacy instruction or information literacy session. So we had that challenge at Penn State. In addition, we had a scalability challenge where we couldn't reach every class that we wanted to reach, or maybe there's some classes that were strictly online or that didn't want to come into the library, so like we weren't being able to sufficiently scale our efforts in our instruction and outreach. And then the way that we still do primarily and did previously teach information literacy was through a one-shot, 50-minute, 1 hour, 75-minute session at the most. And in those sessions, it's really hard to either get beyond one high order skill or really just to touch higher order skills at all, because sometimes you focus completely on the fundamentals and the basics. So we wanted to kind of push students in their critical information literacy and their ability to, become confident and confident in their information literacy. And then so that's kind of where the information literacy landscape was at Penn State and when we started thinking about the badges. So Emily hired me as her grad assistant actually in 2013 to work on developing the information literacy digital badges. So as we're developing the badges, my PhD program really focused on systems thinking. So these are all of the different, the 3 different ways that kind of badges function as a system. And so I really like the quote that's up at the top there by Donella Meadows that talks about the 3 things that are essential to a system, right? So the badging system has to have 3 things. It has to have elements, interconnections, and a function or purpose. So kind of those elements of badges that we touched on a little bit and are going to continue to touch on, like the design, the issuers, the description of the badge, the fact that it is a micro-learning environment. So in micro-learning, you lose some of the context and the bigger picture. And then really what's the value of that badge and who is judging that value, right? Because internally, the value could look much different than it does to some sort of accreditor or employer. And then badges have a lot of interconnections that Emily touched on with the ecosystem. But there's other things like micromasters that we haven't touched on too much, but that give you, right, like a quick kind of blasted, intense opportunity to earn a master's degree. We have curricular integrations, and then it could be formal learning or informal learning. And so then the purpose of badges really is to recognize that learning happens in a variety of ways and to capture those smaller units like the academic currency. And then our favorite article and many people's favorite article about badges is by an author whose last name is Reginas, and it was in a conference proceeding where he really talks about badges being this talkative object, right? So like it's this learning experience that the student has, they have an image for it, and it gives them kind of a springboard to talk about what this learning was like, how they've connected it to their life, how they've applied it, maybe how they've transferred it. So we've had the opportunity to speak to a lot of different people about badges and micro-credentials. So in one of those sessions was with major employers like Deloitte or Johnson & Johnson, and that talkative objects piece was key for them when it comes to things like career fairs where they hear the same team, I led a team in class 14 times, and if somebody came and showed initiative with something like this, it would really make that candidate memorable at a career fair. So that's the approach that we took to designing our badges and thinking about them in the context of information literacy and the broader picture.
There we go.
So as we think about how we've connected this to our instruction and our information literacy and the way that we integrate with courses, we had a variety of challenges in our adoption. So This should be pretty familiar to anybody who's familiar with like the diffusion of innovation model or something along those lines. But we had, our badges were created, and we'll go over a little bit about what they look like in a little bit, but our badges were created in 2013, and it really took until 2016 before we saw any significant adoption of the badges in courses. So there's a variety of challenges when it comes to using something new like this. So, right, transcripts have been around for a long time. Even if employers can't really decipher what the classes are, they trust the transcript as being a good representation of whatever the student learned in their major in college, right? So micro-credentials were at a disadvantage in that process because the quality might be questionable. A lot of people just get turned off at the name badge because they think it's lighthearted or like a game, or it's a fun competitive thing, but it's not really capturing deep learning that's meaningful. Some other adoption challenges that we had when thinking about bringing a new mode of instruction to the classroom was aligning the assessments that we're doing with kind of the other activities that students are doing in the classroom and making sure that there's some sort of meaningful connection between them. Variations in badge design, so this speaks broadly to badges. Some people have created their badges with all automated assessment. Our badges are more of a mix between automated quizzes and then required articulation and reflection that requires our feedback manually to the students, which gets a little bit into the next point, the scale and sustainability of badges. So we've had, since 2016, we've had increased demand to the point where the demand outstrips our supply. So right now we're going through some strategic thinking about, is there a good cap for our badges? But it's definitely something that you want to consider too with your student population about what will unexpected success of the badges look like, essentially, right? So we were kind of planning for, expected, like this would be great. The unexpected happened, like they were more successful than we ever really thought they would be. Or maybe I thought they would be, maybe I only had more confidence than me. And then the external perceived value, which goes into a little bit about the badge design and thinking about that. And then the lack of connection to existing systems, right? So the badges are, the experiential transcript helps connect them to other parts of the student learning experience. Mm-hmm. But then without that, they are kind of an isolated learning, and there's lack of awareness from employers and from instructors or even from the students earning them.
Great. So those are some of our adoption challenges that Torrie just went over. This is kind of like a recap slide to just talk about the benefits of using digital badges. Some of these things we've touched on before, some of them we hadn't. But this idea around data richness, digital badges support assessment, they support validity, security analysis, etc. So by having the badges and students completing them, you get a lot of these things kind of built in. You have the students' responses, or you can collect, how they, if they're like written responses, you can collect them. If they're quizzes and things like that, you have built-in assessments that you could then analyze that data to get more information, figure out where students are having problems, what topics they like or don't like, that sort of thing. With badge platforms, they offer some type of, login. It's often tied to your school's login, so there's that built-in security and authentication, so that the student is the student and they belong in this class, that sort of thing. So that's, in general, that data richness is really a useful thing that you can get about badges. When you think about teaching one-shot instruction, you have very little of that. You can maybe do a survey after the students attend the session or some type of follow-up, but it's not captured in quite the same way. And so we found that to be a real benefit of having these badges. There's the ability to share them. We talked about this already, but they could, undergraduate student could share it with their potential employer on their LinkedIn profile. If they're taking it within the course of a class and another class requires it, they can share it with that professor, that instructor, which is kind of one of the sort of core tenets of badges, is that, once you earn it, you don't need to earn it again. And so that's, because Penn State is so large, we really haven't seen that happen much. But I can imagine at a smaller institution, if you're offering information literacy badges in like a first year seminar, and then the student comes back in sophomore year or something like that, you know, and could show, hey, I already earned this, you know, that's a definite benefit for the student. As we talked about before, they're pretty flexible in that you can stack them together and in different ways to kind of showcase specific skills. Badges within a certain discipline or area like information literacy can be scaffolded, and we'll show you how we've done that with our badges in a moment, but they can build on each other basically, and that flexibility is kind of built in to the format. We touched on this also. They can provide what we call a signpost for learning, a way for a student to kind of see where their learning has gone and where they need to go still. We saw that in the learning pathways as well. And they can incorporate things that happen outside the traditional avenues like a class, through things like extracurricular activities or related activities, so that they can paint a fuller picture of their learning. And then two things we listed as social benefits of digital badges. They offer a way for students to, quote, stop out their learning. So the example we often use for this is, you know, if a student needs to take a leave of absence to take care of a family member or something like that, with badges and that kind of learning pathway idea, they have a sense of, they have a map and they know what they've earned and what they have left to go. And so that if they do need to take some time off, when they are able to resume their studies again, they have a much clearer sense of where they can pick up, what they have left to do, and kind of a pathway to complete it.
Mm-hmm. And also, like if they do end up never coming back, they
mm-hmm.
at least have some
yes.
evidence of their learning.
Right. And then the other idea is just kind of going back to that open credentials idea is this supports the ownership of the student's academic records, right? If we all went to using open credentials or something like that, open transcripts, the learner has a lot more independence and autonomy over their academic records because they can port them to and from different systems. They can easily access them. They can say, they can spot maybe, you know, something wrong in their record and say like, hey, I need to correct this. So those are some of the what we call social benefits of badges, and even extending it into transcripts or open credentials. So that's the end of that section. The next thing we're going to talk about is a little bit more detail about how we're using them here at Penn State, but I did just want to pause and see if anybody had any questions at this point. If so, feel free to just speak up and use your mic or type it into the chat.
That's a good rub.
Thank you, Ryan. Oops. Sorry. All right, I gotta get my screen back. There we go. Okay, so a little bit more detail about our badge system here. As Torrie mentioned, a couple years ago, we got started on building this program, and it's expanded, but we have what we call two basic sets of badges. And the first one we started with is this information literacy badge set. And you can see by the visual that's on there, we have a hierarchy kind of built in. So the idea is you can kind of ignore that one at the very bottom. It's off by itself. That was meant to be for students doing a tour, but we don't really use that anymore. So if you look at those gray badges towards the bottom, we've grouped them into kind of skill sets. One is Savvy Searcher, the next one is Questioner of Information, and the last one is Organizer of Information. And when we were building these, we still had the ACRL standards. The framework was in process, but they weren't out. The framework was not out yet. So we built these around the standards and what later became the framework. And we kind of grouped them into families, as you can see on the hierarchy. And so the idea is a student would earn any of these gray badges in the context of a course. And we were thinking they would earn like all of these badges over the course of an undergraduate degree. So that's kind of like the timeline we were thinking. And then if a student earned all the gray badges within a certain category, like the Savvy Searcher, they could earn that blue meta badge. And then as they earn the other 2 meta badges there that you see in blue, they'd be eligible to earn this gold Uber badge at the top. And that Uber badge would carry the weight of all 10 of those badges plus the meta badges behind it. And that would be ideally what the student would place on their e-portfolio, LinkedIn, you know, that would be kind of the one to really showcase with an employer. But within, you know, one course, they might just earn between 1 and 5 of these badges, depending on the course, was how we designed these. So they're grouped into categories, and then they are kind of in a hierarchy, leading the student up to this gold Uber badge, which is what I encourage them to earn. And there's a little bit of gamification built in there. Gamification kind of helped inform the way digital badges work. And the idea is, you know, as you earn these lower level badges, they kind of feed up, or you could kind of level up to the next kind of badge in order to earn the highest badge. And so it plays off of that, like incentivizing that you see in games. And so that's kind of where that comes from. And then I talked about this a little bit, but a little bit more detail, how we are using these badges. We are embedding them primarily within residential instruction, but we'll get to that to include online. And as far as residential courses here, primarily we're using them in our general education courses, like your rhetoric, composition, public speaking, first year seminar, those types of courses for the most part. We've used them in different ways. One is a flipped classroom scenario, and that is where the student does the badge and then comes in for one-shot instruction. So the students, you can kind of depend on them having some background information on a topic, such as evaluating credibility. And then when you see them for an in-person instruction session, you know, you can start by assuming they have some level of knowledge of that because they've done the badge already. Or you can, you know, tailor the assignment to go along with whatever badge they've already done. But it allows you to do instruction at a little bit deeper level than if they were just coming in cold and you're not really knowing what kind of background or things they've learned out before. The other way is to kind of just flip that around. So you have the face-to-face instruction, and then they complete a badge after the instruction. And that works well too. We've done it both ways, and in both scenarios, I found that the students, like I said, were able to get to topics that typically we wouldn't be able to cover in just a one-shot instruction session. The students, you know, have a bit more both like knowledge base as well as they're a bit more like reflective and a little more thoughtful about the topic. And then we've also offered them in place of face-to-face instruction. So again, it depends on the course and the instructor and what their goals are and things like that, but they can be a way of offering instruction, and that's helpful for courses that are hesitant to give up class time to come in for instruction. This is like an alternative mode that we can offer to them. And then another way we're using those information literacy badges is we recently started a program here where we have student-to-student research consultants. So like a student drops in, needs research help, they get initial help from another student. And as a way to train those interns or there's those peer research consultants, we've been using the badges as a way to give them, you know, some firm footing on some basics of information literacy. So that's another way we're using that set of badges. And then our other set of badges, I'm going to turn it over to you.
So that's primarily, our information literacy badges have primarily been used residentially, not completely. There are some online classes using them, but the online classes have used this set of badges more often. So this is called the Library Connection badges. And these badges were created as a way to provide an equivalent experience. Anybody familiar with the ECRL distance learning section standards, they focus a lot on equivalent access and equivalent experience no matter what that online student or that distance student is trying to do from the library. So at Penn State, we have a pretty robust and popular residential open house. that has some introductory level learning outcomes. Students come through the library, they do some activities, etc. Online students did not have the same experience in introducing them to the library. At the time these were created, there wasn't even an orientation for undergraduate students in online. There is currently now an orientation, but it's just an information giving session rather than kind of a learning model to that orientation. So our library connection badges are a set of, we started with a set of 5 badges, we dropped 1, and then we added 1. So there are academic integrity, interlibrary loan is the one with the mail, so having students kind of learn about the different services that are available for them for delivery, which is one of the few ways that distance students actually do really differ from residential students. Ask a librarian, line search, and then we have a lot of library resources in Canvas in our learning management system, so kind of what does that look like and how students connect from Canvas to the library. So these badges are being used in these 4 main sections. So English 15 Rural Campus is kind of the rhetoric and composition course, and they are being used there as a highly recommended activity. So we'll get into a little bit about kind of the options. Residential courses have pretty much required the badges if they're being used. Online courses have had more flexibility in that. So for English 15, it's a highly recommended activity for every single student to complete. Some instructors, there's about 13 sections, some instructors give extra credit, some don't. Some encourage it, some don't, and that definitely plays out in the class participation. We just have an open group, so sometimes students will learn about these and they want to come in and complete them on their own. Earth and Mineral Sciences 302 is an orientation class, and they actually earn a hybrid of the information literacy and the library connection, and they earn 20%. It's 20% of their grade to do the library badges. And then BBH 146 is also kind of like a first launch of the class, first class in the major. And those students earn the academic integrity badge, and it was worth 30 points of their total course assignment. There have been other little offshoots here and there, but this pretty much captures a lot of what's going on. The English 15 takes up a lot of the time and capacity, obviously, because there's about 13 up to 15 sections of that. So then these are the badge names and then the number issued. So total since 2016, more robustly, like beginning of 2017, has been 1,900, around 1,900 library connection badges we've issued.
Yeah, and I think I forgot to say, oops, I keep doing that. I think I forgot to say, but I had it in here, how many information literacy badges we've offered. Since 2015, we've issued 4,600 badges to students. We've evaluated over 18,000 steps of the badge, so each badge has about 3 to 5 steps on average. And in the fall, we issued 1,500 badges. So talking about that scalability and sustainability was a big thing for us to work on. We're still figuring it out, but it's as we say, it's a good problem for us to have. This back to some sort of examples, use cases, things like that. These are just some other examples if you're interested and want to take a look. University of Southern California Fullerton offers something called Spark tutorials that are an example of badges for information literacy. There's not a ton detail you can see unless you're like a student there, but if you Google it, you can find their program and get a sense of like how they're using it. They offer more of like a tutorial, like an online tutorial that you like walk through and then get a badge at the completion. Aurora Public Schools in Colorado have, the entire school district has an employer readiness badge program where the students are working to earn badges to get them ready for the workforce. And within that, there's an information literacy badge set. So that's an example of how they're being used in like I think it's elementary, middle, and high school there. I could be wrong, it might just be middle and high school. But that'll give you a sense of how a program could look for that setting. And then just another example of them being used in a college setting, SUNY Albany has meta-literacy badges that incorporate information literacy into the bigger picture of meta-literacies. but they have a pretty robust set of badges, if you want to Google that. And then something we're starting to see more and more of are employers offering their own badges. And there are many. I only listed one here, but the main one of the main ones is IBM. They've been a really early adopter and embracer of badges, and they offer a lot of their employees the opportunity to like increase their skill sets, get promotions, apply for, you know, bigger and better jobs, so to speak, through a badging platform. And that's primarily internal, but like I said, we are starting to see more and more employers offering their own badges so that they can get their employees the skills that they, you know, are lacking in the overall company. They can kind of grow whatever skills they think their employees need in order to keep their employees learning and into better jobs.
Yeah, and IBM has also partnered with Northeastern University to do a earn IBM badges, get credit for a master's program at Northeastern.
Yeah, and I think we'll be seeing a lot more of that as this sort of reciprocity between colleges and employers in order to get employees up to speed with the specific skills they're looking at. Because like we said, employers are saying there's a skill gap between college graduates and the people we're hiring, and that's a way to kind of fill that in. Yeah. So it's an interesting area to kind of watch for developments. So that's the end of our sort of third section with use cases. The fourth and final group that we had was to talk a little bit about best practices for designing and implementing badges. If you are thinking about doing something like this, we just kind of pulled together some things we think might be helpful, but like we've been saying, if you have questions along the way, feel free to put them in the chat, or we can talk about it at the end. So to start.
Yeah, so we did research as part of our first year in designing the badges, and so you can see more of our more of the research in our paper there in College and Research Libraries. But broadly, we did it with human resource professionals, and we wanted to see their perceived interest in badges, but also in information literacy. And so we made sure not to use the term information literacy, but we kind of pulled out the skills that are underneath what an information literate citizen would look like, an employee would look like, and we asked questions around those. And those help to inform our development of the badges, because while we did use the information literacy framework in our local context here at Penn State, we also wanted to have the badges help students with skills that they weren't necessarily getting in the curriculum the way that it was. So we focused on kind of where those gaps were that employers thought. So these are some of the big trends, and as we said, you can definitely read the paper and dive more into the research, and we'd be happy to talk about it further. But for the purposes of this, if you remember our hierarchy, we have that meta badge at the top, and so we asked employers how many badges they would be willing to evaluate, and they said up to 4. So 1 to 4 was the most common answer. So unless you need some sort of really specific technical skill for a job that correlates to a smaller unit of a badge, putting kind of one of those big meta badges or Uber badges on there shows a more competency, right? Because it's a prerequisite and they build on each other. Only about 6% of employers, and this was 5 years ago, but only 6% of employers were not interested in badges. About 33% said yes, they would be willing to accept them, and 60-ish% said they want to learn more about the badges. So that was what happened, and so that gave us like this awareness gap, right? They are interested in them, but they don't really know what they are yet. And then the perceived value varies by industry. So obviously manufacturing and IT are really high. Healthcare has a lot of existing certification, and so does education. So they were a little bit lower, but that trend is definitely shifting for all industries, because I was recently at a summit for micro-credentials, and employers were there as well. And there are complete medical schools that have badged in competency their entire curriculum, and students are earning badges, and that's how they are showing that they're ready for whatever kind of board exam they have to take. So they're definitely growing across all industry.
So moving into kind of some considerations for sustainability and scalability. This is like wisdom from the trenches to kind of think about. And again, we're happy to answer or talk about any of these more. But if you are thinking about launching a program, we would definitely recommend starting with a pilot. Like most things, you know, I'm sure you've done pilots to launch anything new, just to get a handle on what the workflow is like. As we've said, this is really kind of a paradigm shift for both librarians and instructors and colleges and universities. So a lot of people aren't familiar with the basics, but then also like when you get into the details, like what the workflow looks like, how it's going to work within their course, like when to set deadlines, timelines, things like that. So we definitely recommend trying it with like one class initially, and as we say there, find partners or advocates or early adopters, anybody that you've worked with before that you have a good working relationship with is a good person to start with. Or if you don't have that, somebody that's, you know, excited about something new, trying something new, open to that sort of thing, they're going to be your best allies in getting a program off the ground, because they then turn into kind of evangelists for it, as long as they like it, assuming they like it, and will, you know, tell their colleagues. And that for us has really been the way to get the most buy-in, is to kind of start small like that and find people that are willing to try it, and when they have a good experience, they're just likely to share it with other people. The other thing we would suggest is, as far as sustainability, is evaluation rubrics. So depending on what you offer your badges in, having a rubric there for whoever's doing the evaluation of the work is really going to help with the time involved in grading the student work that comes in, and then also keeping it consistent among, if you have multiple evaluators, keeping the grading consistent across people, so they know what they're looking for in this type of response, and kind of keeping track of those details. So that's really kind of crucial. Those are all things that have been crucial to the success of our program as far as keeping it sustainable. And then as far as scaling it, one thing that we've really depended on is being able to crowdsource the evaluation. So Torrie mentioned some of the numbers, like in the thousands, and the way we've been able to do that started out just like the two of us grading student work as it came in, and
like that, Saturday night at 1 a.m.
That's not sustainable or scalable. So we look to other our colleagues here at Penn State, both at University Park and other campuses, to see if anybody else wanted to help out. And we have awesome work colleagues, and we have at times up to 14 people helping us to evaluate the work that comes in on these student badges. So that's one way we've been able to make it work. Another thing that's not on the slide, but you may be interested, is this idea of peer review. And that's where you would have other students evaluate other students' work. Like I said, we're not doing that currently, but it's something that gets talked about quite a bit. And there are other universities doing that type of model. But it's interesting to think about. The other thing to help with scalability is auto grading options. So I think you may have mentioned this, but a lot of our badges require the students to write a text response to a prompt after reviewing some kind of content or thinking about their own experiences. So they're somewhat intensive to read and grade because they're all individual, and you're reading a couple of paragraphs per student. So when we started creating our badges, we didn't have this option. We do now, and that is having like auto-graded quizzes. So multiple choice quizzes where the students can respond to the content that you provided to them, and it assesses their learning automatically. So we have a few of those incorporated now, which does help with the scalability, because obviously we're not looking at all of those responses like we are some of the other types of questions. So that's helped us.
Yeah, and that's really just like making that decision is really just a balance. Like, so that we look at we review our steps, make sure they're up to date and everything's working. So we look at a step and we say, like, what is our learning here, and how can we show this, right? What's the evidence that we need to show students the learning? And if it's something that a automated quiz can show evidence of, then we try to switch the step to be automated, so that we're spending our time and energy on the steps that really matter for intensive reflection back to the student. So this is our final slide, so get ready for your questions. So kind of just thinking about the capacity of the instruction node, and these are also just what we've learned over time. So evaluate the time involved in badge instruction from the creation of badges to the implementation to the maintenance. So it's important just to keep a general track of your time, especially with maintenance, right, in the upkeep and how long this is taking, so you can budget it into your overall workflow. And that goes also with evaluators, having evaluators track how long it takes them to evaluate a set of badges, which will depend heavily on the design of your badges. So our evaluation time is not a universal recommendation. Balancing the scale of design with the learning activities, right? So it's always kind of like the sacrifice between completely scale, like millions of people, and kind of building relationships and scaffolding the students' knowledge. Recruiting, so make sure that, as Emily said, we have really good crowdsourced evaluators. We do some training sessions and some norming sessions to make sure they feel supported in the work that they're doing, and they also know kind of how to record it for their own work purposes. CAP participation, so this is something we're working through right now, like what is the most that our department could handle in a semester, and if you make a request after that date, we look for an alternative way to engage instruction with you because we can't do the badges well with your class. And then so kind of the final thing is to pare down instructor enthusiasm. So we've had multiple instructors say like, I want to do all 10, which is understandable if you don't understand our intent, which was to do them over an entire major. And so they're like, well, that's a lot of busy work for the student, and students then just get annoyed with the badges. They don't see a lot of meaning in them because it's not connected to their assignments. So we say like, oh, well, we've had best practice of like 1 to 3 per semester, and it works really well when you connect them to these different assignments and you kind of spread them out in the course. Students aren't feeling inundated with just these steps to do that they don't see the connections when they do if they have more time to reflect on it. So those are some more just recommendations in terms of capacity that we've learned over 4 years now.
Yeah.
So, we're happy to open it up to questions now. We have like 3 minutes left for questions now, but if we don't, if people have to go and we don't get to them, we'd be happy to follow up as well. Oh yeah, and before we get to questions, Emily and I wrote a library technology report that's coming in April 2019, all about micro-credentials and digital badges. So probably lots of your questions are going to be answered in there as well.
And then I just wanted to pull this up. So it's here, our email addresses are on this last slide, but we can take some questions if there are any. But feel free to follow up with us, if there's something we didn't answer or you'd like more detail about anything. It's a lot of ground to cover in an hour. So if we didn't cover something in depth to your satisfaction, that's understandable. We just tried to kind of hit the high notes.
We probably have another slide, so just ask.
Yeah.
Ask us, we'll have it somewhere.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
Yes.
And it's, like I said, it's kind of a paradigm shift for a lot of people. And so there's a lot of details to get through.
Yeah, it's complex. It's a system.
So here's a question. Let's read it. When you recommend 1 to 3 badges per semester, am I correct in assuming that you are referencing the low-level badges and not the meta Uber badges?
Correct.
That is correct, yeah. We're talking about, if you can picture that hierarchy, and I can try and go back to it. Hang on here. We are talking about, just those, here we go, those gray badges. So we're talking about best practice for us has been students to do 1 to 3 of those gray badges within the context of a course. That's a good question. Next one, do you find you have spent a lot of time updating your material? I find as soon as I say record a screencast, there's a cue for IT to change the web page. Any tips on making your content less susceptible to that kind of change? Yes, we have had that. We've started relying less on YouTube videos because surprisingly they go down a lot. They get taken down quite a bit, even if they're ours or another institutions. What we've started replacing them with are things like Credo information literacy modules that we subscribe to, where the content is a little bit more stable. And trying not to, I guess we don't incorporate a lot of screencasts for that reason. We haven't had that. But we do spend quite a bit of time reviewing the content, making sure it's fresh. Definitely each summer we look at all the badges in detail and make any necessary changes. links go dead in the middle of the semester, you know, obviously we change those as soon as we know about it.
Mm-hmm.
But we do try and keep on top of that and kind of have a rolling review. But for the most part, like I have to say, like our badges have stood the test of time overall, and the basics. So.
Yeah, the basics are still there. We did do some stuff like when the framework came out, we did an additional correlation. So we mapped the standards to the framework to see which ones of our badges were hitting the framework, and we identified gaps that way as well. So we definitely try to do regular content revisions to make sure that the activities and the learning is still current. Like we've recently added some like critical information literacy activities in a couple of our badges, so those kinds of things.
Yeah. What kind of feedback have you received from students? Do they get the concept pretty intuitively?
Yeah, we have to, so you can return a badge if the student is not sufficient in their evidence. We've had to return very little. Like I would say overall, we accept about 95% of the student responses. The step that I have to return the most is, we didn't mention it here, but there's also an APA badge. And so students have to write APA for 3 things. And so that's the step that I have to return the most because they don't even understand what a book chapter in an edited book is. So that kind of, like there was a gap in our badge there. So then I reworked the badge to get at that a little bit more for students. But yeah, we have, and it's amazing. We always comment about like how thoughtful the student responses are. I mean, occasionally you get the student who's like, this is a waste of time. And they write like 1 sentence in each step box. But for the most part, students write really, really thoughtful and time-intensive reflections and paragraphs to us.
It is 3:02, so I don't want to keep anybody much longer. But let me go back to that last. Yeah, I'm still sharing. Oh, no. I will put our email addresses in the chat. Like I said, feel free to follow up with us if you have any questions. And I guess otherwise I'll turn it back to Amanda if she has any closing words.
Amanda? Okay, well, we can't hear Amanda. Oh,
sorry about that. Thank you guys so much for sharing this with us today. And I just want to thank everybody for joining. And if you have a few moments to complete our evaluation form, we will put that link in the chat box. And if you registered for today's session, you'll receive an email with the link for that survey as well. And your feedback really helps us determine what directions to take our programming and the kinds of things that you would like to hear from us. Also, there'll be a recording of this presentation, which we will share for those who registered. Then it will also be on the CRD blog. And again, if you're not a CALA member and you're interested in becoming a member, you can email Erin Burns at emb28@psu.edu, and she will have someone contact you. So thank you again, everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day.